somewhere after around the year 1975, 1976, when I was around 14, 15 in there, every Friday night we had a family tradition. And that would be that Mom would get some fast food and bring that home. And it would either be McDonald's or a submarine sandwich from a place in Battle Creek that was called the Yellow Submarine. And as soon as we would finish our dinner, we would jump in the car and take a trip to Kalamazoo and go to the Maple Hill Mall. And Mom would go her way and do shopping, and Dad and I would go our way. And my dad was very kind and patient, and he would allow me to go to Aladdin's castle where I could play pinball machines, and I usually would get $1 or $2 to be able to do that. And then the grand finale would be we would end up going to the Christian bookstore, Zondervan's. By that point, all of us in our family had made a profession of faith, and we would always look forward to going to the Christian bookstore every Friday night. And it became such a regular routine that the employees there would look for us, and even the store manager would look for us, and we just became good friends. Well, in 1975 and 1976, the drama at the time that the church was kind of going through, or the growing pains, had to do with two things. One was the sudden introduction of new versions of the Bible. The Living Bible had just kind of come out, and people struggled with whether they should stick with the King James or should they use a more modern language. And so that was one debate going on. And the other debate was the rise in contemporary Christian music. And when we say contemporary, if you were to listen to it by today's standards, you would think, what was the big deal? But it wasn't quartet, it wasn't Southern gospel, it wasn't choral, it was out of the ordinary, and some people had a very difficult time with that. And in that context, you need to understand or to know that I came about in making my profession of faith by attending a Christian rock concert that the band's name was Zion, and the joke was that Zion spelled backwards is noise, and they made a lot of it. But in the midst of that noise, the gospel was preached, and at least one 14-year-old responded to that gospel message, and I stand here today because of the ministry of Zion Rock Band, the gospel group. And in that setting, in the Christian bookstore, the store manager said, there's a new album out by the name of Mike Johnston. Let me put it on for you. And so it's playing, and it's a little bit contemporary for the time. And as we're talking with the store manager, this man and his wife interrupt our conversation. And to get an idea of what he looked like, think of a bulldog with a crew cut, you know? And his first words that interrupted our conversation was, "Excuse me, is this a Christian bookstore?" And the store manager said, "Well, of course it is." And the man replied, "If you're playing that music, it obviously is not." Well, my dad thought that it would be very helpful to come to the aid of the store manager. And he said, "Well, my son plays this kind of music, and he's a Christian." And the man replied, "I doubt it. I doubt it." Well, my dad had an Irish temper. That didn't go over very well. And so he then began to escalate the conversation and try to explain of why this could be indeed very Christ-centered and something that God is using and blessing and is very much a part of. And in the midst of the discussion, the man's adoring wife looked at her husband and said out loud, "Honey, it's evident this man doesn't know anything." At which point my dad offered the opportunity to step outside and backslide. I'm not making this one up. I don't remember how it ended, but thankfully it ended without physical contact. That was 40 years ago, and I still remember it just like yesterday. And how appropriate to think of that story with the words from Jesus out of Matthew 7, "Judge not, lest you be judged." And if there is a criticism of the Christian church that often gets raised by people who don't go to church, it's this. There are a whole bunch of people that just judge me, and they judge me, and they judge me, and they do the very same things that I do. And they're probably right. And that is why it's so important that we look again at the words of Jesus in Matthew 7, where he says, "Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and do not consider the plank in your own eye?" If we wish to be successful, faithful, obedient Christians, we will be a people who are concerned with what is good and what is holy and what is righteous. And our concern will rest largely with what we see in our actions, in our attitudes, in our dreams. In other words, when we judge, we will judge ourselves, and we will look at our standard of, are we being obedient to the teachings of Jesus Christ? It is a shame and an embarrassment that 50 years ago, that the people who proclaimed the gospel message the loudest and said that they believed this the strongest was the bastion of racism in the United States and segregation. The words of Jesus should make us both comfortable and uncomfortable, because they call us to live a life that isn't self-centered. They call us to live a life of self-examination, and that we use the ruler or the measuring stick of the Word of God that teaches us that we are to be a people of love, of good works, of obedience to God, and not people of bigotry, of racism, of selfishness, of materialism. Name whatever sins you want. The most hideous thing that I think the church got caught up in was that they argued so much about external sins, or what they thought were sins, more appropriately. How you wore your hair, the length of your hair, whether or not you wore makeup, what kind of music you listened to, what about what kind of beverage you drank. And they spent a lot of time using that as a measurement of holiness and a measurement of godliness. When the fact of the matter is, Jesus is addressing the issues of the heart. What lies in your heart? How do you respond to other people? Do you live a life that is self-centered, or do you love those who don't love you? Are you kind to your enemies? Do you pray for those who persecute you? Do you share of your resources to others who are in need? These are the things and the measuring stick that we find throughout the Sermon on the Mount. And yet, so often, even yet today, these are the things that we don't hear preached and that we don't hear being taught as to how we as believers should live and respond. Which brings us to the next portion in Matthew 7. There are happy portions in here that I would be very, very happy and feel very comfortable to preach on. But I instead purposely chose some of the most uncomfortable words that Jesus ever said. And it scares me day and night when I think of them. For when Jesus says that not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, that should get our attention. And that should make us give pause. And what Jesus is saying is this, that many will say to me in that day, didn't we prophesy? Didn't we cast out demons? Didn't we do many wonders? And he will declare unto them, depart from me, for I never knew you, because you practiced lawlessness. They missed the first and the second commands. To love God with heart, mind, and soul, and to love the neighbor as you love yourself. We aren't called as a people to put on a circus show. It's great if we have celebration. It's great if we have a rah-rah session. But the proof of the pudding of our faith is how do we live when we walk out of these four walls. The true test is this. Church begins when you leave this building. That's when your worship of God really begins. When you engage that cranky neighbor that just drives you crazy, or that coworker that does the same, treats you very poorly. These are the opportunities of when we have that we can let our light shine. And may we let the love of Christ shine through us in a manner that people know that they walk what they talk. They believe and they serve and they love even when it's uncomfortable and it costs them something. For that is the mark of the true believer of Jesus Christ. May we all be mindful of these words and examine our hearts and be quick to judge our actions and be even quicker to love our neighbor and to encourage them in their walk of faith. Amen.